One of the main barriers that women face in the workplace is related to the role that they play at home mostly. So for example, these days, women still take a disproportionate share of the child rearing. Now, related to this is the fact that unequal gender roles, for example, in the household and in the labor market, generate and are reinforced by sticky stereotypes. So for example, if society as a whole believes that men and women should play different roles, they have some gender-specific skills or gender-specific traits, then this generates a sort of invisible barrier to equality in the workplace. So after decades of progress and gender convergence, today there are still sizable and persistent gaps in most indicators of labor market success throughout the developed world. So the situation varies across countries. For example, in the UK and the US, wage gaps are relatively large, but employment gaps are smaller than in continental Europe. In Scandinavia, the mean wage gaps are relatively small, but women are substantially underrepresented in the corporate sector. So depending on the institutional environment, the aspect of inequalities that becomes more problematic or more salient can vary across countries, but there is really no clear sign of disappearing gender gaps anytime soon in most countries in the developed world. While the arrival of children is relatively neutral for fathers' careers, it does instead generate a sharp and persistent drop in mothers' earnings. And this lasts for quite a few years after childbirth, and this is indeed the case in many countries characterized by different paternal leave provision, maternal leave provision, and family policies in general. So institutional factors alone cannot explain the motherhood penalty. And this is also important because other aspects of gender inequalities have closed or indeed reversed, like for example gender gaps in education, which leaves the motherhood penalty as one single factor that can explain a lot of the remaining inequalities between men and women. Gender quotas are a salient policy response to the underrepresentation of women in leadership positions. However, there isn't definite evidence that really gender quotas crack the glass ceiling beyond the little limited effect that they have on the women directly appointed to boards. One possible view is that quotas might be perceived as a top-down box-ticking exercise whereby you might say, okay, we have the policy in place, problem is solved, without really changing the corporate culture towards equality. An alternative approach based on sort of voluntary target might instead be perceived as a more bottom-up approach, sustainable and could foster growth depending on whatever is needed by different businesses, but I'm not aware of economic research on this yet. COVID has brought substantial changes to the organization of professional and domestic work, and maybe some of that is here to stay. So for example, some employees may have the choice to continue working from home for a few days a week, and we expect that women might be demanding more days of working from home because they have a higher share of household responsibilities. So working from home opportunities may of course help the work-life balance, but the flexibility comes at a cost. So for example, one important question is whether high-profile jobs will be available to employees who work from home, whether there is a value attached to physical presence in the workplace, whether working from home may dilute one's presence in the workplace and then feed into career and promotion prospects. And this of course would have an impact on gender inequalities.